So one of the great evils of political discourse and political tactics, not only in the United States of America, but the world over, is the fact that politicians are just waiting for a crisis in order to implement the things that they already want to do. And by the way, political activists operate in the same manner. If you'll remember my appearance on Culture War, where Emma Vigeland was talking about Medicare for All as a crime control option to the crime spike that she was denying the existence of simultaneously, this was obviously an attempt for her to cram down her political agenda, her pre-existing unrelated political agenda, which she would be pushing as a solution, just looking for a problem to fill it. Well, a perfect example of this was the fact that during the pandemic, a bunch of left-wing cities that already wanted to move on criminal justice reform decided that they were going to release a bunch of inmates early. Now look, there were a lot of unknowns in terms of the pandemic, so I could understand certain people in office in order to reduce transmission, because it's not only dangerous for the inmates, but it's also dangerous for the guards, trying to thin out the prison population in order to prevent them from being significant vectors of transmission. But obviously, a policy that had that idea in mind should skew older, should skew to inmates with pre-existing conditions, and most importantly, it should skew towards inmates that are not convicted of violent crimes, that are not convicted of crimes with victims, that don't have a pattern of behavior that would indicate that they would become a future offender. Well, the state of Oregon clearly and obviously made the wrong call in this instance, because one of the people that was released early is now a person of interest, probably the main suspect by the time you're seeing this video, if not already arrested, for 4 murders. They released a serial killer who, by the way, had a violent history, met none of the parameters of somebody who is particularly vulnerable to the virus, and they did so very shortly after his conviction on serious charges. We're going to get into it. We're going to talk about it, but before we get into that, I just want to say thank you to everybody who signed up. actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
And thank you to my podcast listeners, Spotify, Apple, and Google's podcasting platform. So as the New York Post reports, Jesse Lee Calhoun, aged 38, was among 1,000 inmates granted clemency by former Democratic Governor Kate Brown as fears over the spread of the pandemic swept through the nation. Now, as I said in the open, I'm not blanket against this policy. As I said in the open, I'm not blanket against trying to reduce transmission, especially when you meet the parameters I laid out in the intro. As long as somebody was older, as long as somebody was not convicted of a series of violent crimes, they weren't a career criminal, I think it was worth the risk, because we don't want people to die in jail on soft charges when they're uniquely vulnerable to the virus. However, this was not the case for Calhoun, and of course, it may have led to devastating results. On top of that, I will point out that his age group didn't really align either. This was a guy who is now aged 38, meaning back when this policy was instituted, he was around 35 and 36. If you look at the graphs of the most vulnerable populations to the virus, he just was not in that group. But his charges also indicate that he was an ongoing threat to society. Calhoun was sent to prison in 2019 on a series of felony charges, including burglary, possession of a stolen vehicle, injuring a cop, and choking a police canine. He was due to be jailed until June of 2022. Now, these murders, if you guys are unaware, were in fact committed in the year 2022, according to the reports. These murders could have been prevented if they would have just prosecuted this guy more seriously and held him to the less serious charges, because again, he only got sentenced to about 3 years back in 2019 in the first place, but all they had to do was hold him under those charges until the full length of his sentence, and these 4 women would be alive still to this day. And their names are as follows: Ashley Reel, age 22, Bridget Webster, Kirsten Smith, also age 22, and Charity Lynn Perry, age 24. All 4 of these women died in suspicious circumstances in the Portland metro area, and alongside 2 other cases, this sparked the initial concerns about a serial killer in June. Now, I don't know the status of those 2 other people who died under suspicious and similar circumstances. However, I do want to point out that it's the same area. All these women seem to fit the same age profile, so this looks like a classic instance of a serial killer being put out on the loose. Now, I will also add that as of the moment of me recording this video, and this is subject to change, even though the police are claiming that they have evidence that ties Calhoun to the scene of multiple or one of these crimes, he has not been charged. He is only considered a suspect, again, at the moment of me recording this video. But this is an absolute disaster. This guy was charged with serious crimes, and if these women all died, 4 to 6 of them based on what we know now, and if it's a serial killer, possibly more, all because of a policy in order to protect the lives of individuals in the city of Portland, this would be the greatest fail of the governor's administration that decided to pardon these inmates or grant clemency to these inmates. On top of that, I just want to point out, anytime you see something this broad, 1,000 people getting clemency at the same time, you know for a fact that they are not vetting these people on an individual basis the way that they should. And we also have evidence that even if he's not guilty of these crimes, because he was already back in jail once this evidence was discovered, that he was still an ongoing threat in terms of the regular criminality the police had caught on to him before. Calhoun is already back behind bars on unrelated matters and being held at the Snake River Correctional Institution in Ontario after the new governor revoked his early release and had him locked up. Now, he has a long string of arrests dating back to 2004 and has served previous time on an assault conviction in 2009. Now, look, I'm trying to be skeptical. I want to see the evidence come to fruition before I make my final judgment, but regardless of whether or not this person is guilty of 4 or 6 or any number of murders in this potential serial killer bust situation, the fact of the matter is everything in his history, everything in his data would tell us that this was not somebody worthy of early release under the COVID-19 program. Everything about this guy's health, age range, and all of that would also indicate the same. He was not uniquely vulnerable, so there was no reason to overlook these problems in his past, this long history that dates back almost 2 decades, according to this Post article, in order to cut him a break. He was not deserving of it. He continuously committed crimes after being let out. That's why his release was revoked even before they discovered the evidence that ties him to these crimes. And now we might have 4 to 6 women dead because the governor wanted to do something and used COVID-19 as an excuse to rush into it and didn't care about the consequences for their regular citizens. Now, there's definitely a lot of ire for the Portland District Attorney, who is honestly prosecuting way less harshly than that person should have, because if you're a repeat offender with a 20-year rap sheet and you assault a police officer, rob somebody, commit a burglary, commit a grand theft auto, and then choke out a police canine, obviously there ain't something going on right in your head, and you shouldn't be getting a 3-year sentence anyway. But if you're going to give people pitiful sentences, if you're going to cut them breaks when they're not deserving, then you don't need to compound that error by cutting them an additional break and release them even earlier than what honestly was a ridiculously light sentence to begin with. Look at the faces of these women. They are no longer in this world, and it's possibly due to the fact that woke criminal justice activists thought it would be a good idea. So now we have women under 25 being cut down by this person potentially based on the fact that the system didn't care about them. They didn't care about the victims. They prioritized the criminals. They wanted to look virtuous. They got on board with this Black Lives Matter ideology that the prisons are the problem. It's not the people committing crimes that got themselves into prison that are the problem. It's the institution. And they decided out the door, 1,000 people, I don't know, we're not even gonna vet them. I'm sure your list is fine and dandy. We'll go with that. Look, we're a nation of 300 million people. There's a lot of horrible instances that I can pull up, and most of those instances can't be helped. Most of those instances, there wasn't an intervention beforehand that went wrong that ultimately created the opportunity for that criminal to commit that additional crime. This looks like it is one of those rare instances where there was policy in place. It could have been initiated. Somebody could have done something, but they dropped the ball because they didn't care. They dropped the ball because they already had a pre-existing agenda. They wanted to look good, and these are the consequences of it. How would you feel if any of these women were your family members? If any of these women were your friends? If any of these women were people that you cared about, and you find out that not only were they killed, not only were they brutally murdered, but the maniac who did it might have been released, might have been cut a break, despite obvious indicators that he was a serious, ongoing threat to society, despite obvious indicators that he was a career criminal who should have been held and punished to the fullest extent of the law. How would you be able to deal with the fact that a governor on her way out the door thought looking good the moment before she leaves was more important than their lives, was more important than the risk that she assumed you'd be okay with accepting? It's absolutely disastrous. It's absolutely devastating. My thoughts and my heart go out to the members of the family. And honestly, I'm actually hoping that this guy turns out to not be the serial killer, because if I were in that position and I signed clemency for 1,000 people, that would be too much for me to bear, and I don't even wish that upon this former Democratic governor. As bad as she is, as careless and reckless as she actually acted, I don't want her to have to deal with the consequences of that, because it would be rough for me to do so, even though, unlike me, she definitely deserves it. Now, that's all I really have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching. If you like the video, you show them by leaving a like. You subscribe for more content. Follow me on my social medias. Support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about soft on crime, maybe leading to the release of a serial killer. Till next time.